All right, so here we continue with Unit 7, the second lecture of Unit 7, Lecture 7c. We're going to continue talking about development across the lifespan because there's a number of theories of childhood development that sort of organize the process of development in a sequence of stages. And so these are have been so influential and so important in developmental psychology that it warrants devoting an entire lecture to these different types of stage models. So Erik Erikson is an example of a stage model in which he sort of thought of life as a whole, from birth to old age, as a bit of an obstacle course. And that, according to Erik Erikson, his conception of the process of life is that you meet unique challenges at each stage of the lifespan. And his idea is that achieving success and happiness and mental health require that people overcome these series of challenges effectively. And so what he did is he organized the human lifespan into a series of 8 stages, each of which require a certain particular crisis that a person needs to resolve.
So the first crisis is trust versus mistrust, and this is for infants. So this is whether or not they can form trusting attachments to their caregivers when they're babies. Now, whether or not you form a close attachment to your caregiver has an impact on your ability to form close relationships as an adult. And in fact, when they've done research on this topic, they found that adults show similar romantic attachments as the attachments they showed with their caregiver. Okay, so it has consequences later on.
So the ideal, remember the strange situation we talked about last time, resolving this crisis would really be the formation of a secure attachment with the caregiver at this very early stage. And that provides the essential base that the child can use to explore the world and develop in the healthiest possible way. Now the second crisis emerges when the child reaches toddlerhood, and the crisis is, according to Erikson, is achievement of autonomy versus the experiencing shame and doubt. And so the challenge that toddlers face is that now that they can do some things, they can walk around, they can talk a little bit, they have more power to explore, but they still really do rely on their parents. And so the question is, if we're going to resolve this crisis effectively, we need to develop some independence from our caregivers, some ability to be away from our caregivers and make friends, develop some social skills with confidence, overcome the fear of leaving the nest, right? Resolving the crisis in this healthy way determines our ability to be independently effective as adults, in the same way that the secure attachment with a caregiver has implications for adult relationships. The ability to become independent from the caregivers at this early stage and still be confident also determines our ability to become independently effective adults as well. And when this goes wrong, the result is shame and doubt and a loss of confidence anytime the toddler is away from their parents. So if this crisis is not resolved, the toddler may, for the remainder of their life, or well into adulthood, have an inability to be individuals separate from their parents. So that's an unhealthy parent-child relationship. Okay, so crisis number 3, as the toddler moves along and is starting to reach that preschooler age, the stage in the crisis that Erikson identifies is one of initiative versus guilt. So the goal here is to achieve a balance between using mental and physical skills that are developing rapidly at this early stage of child development, just age 5 and 6, for example. They develop mental and physical skills. They're learning how to control inappropriate behaviors in different contexts. And this ability to learn how to function in the world in preparation for school, think about being able to interact with other children in a preschool, for example. The ability to do these things determine whether the child's talents will be fully expressed or whether they'll be hidden and they won't be allowed to be expressed. So there's a lot of guilt associated here because in some way, the child, according to Erikson, the child feels like they're abandoning the parents in a way, moving out into the world and becoming increasingly independent and becoming increasingly able to use their own skills to deal with situations. That could result in guilt and send the child running right back to the parents. So the resolution of this crisis is another stage where developing independence with confidence is an essential goal in order to achieve mental health at this stage and all future stages.
So crisis number 4 occurs with school-aged children, and at this stage, in order to be successful as adults, the children have to learn to master both intellectual skills, so reading, writing, arithmetic, and they also have to develop social skills. So learning how to share with your friends, just learning how to have these friendships and stand up for yourself. Okay? And if they achieve this, they'll develop competency, and we call this competence or industry. However, if they don't achieve these skills, they're going to feel inferior, and this will have consequences later on in life.
And so Erikson identified a number of problems in adulthood as being the result of an inferiority complex that originates from this stage of the process of lifespan development. And adults with an inferiority complex, they always feel like they're not good enough, so they won't be that effective in establishing good romantic relationships and friendships. They might not be motivated to work very hard to develop skills that will land them a decent job because they always feel like they're not good enough. So these are the people that are crippled by a low self-esteem as a result of failing this fourth crisis in childhood development. Now, as adults, a new crisis arises. A lot of these are related to identity, but they occur at different levels as the person develops more and more complex skills and abilities throughout childhood. So as adolescents, the crisis that has to be resolved is one of identity versus role confusion. A person needs to find themselves, needs to develop a good sense of who they are, the kinds of things they're good at, the kinds of things they believe in as adolescents. So this is the major challenge that I pointed to in the earlier lecture. If they fail this crisis, then the outcome is role confusion, and the adolescent never really develops a good sense of who they are and what their purpose is in life. And this can have persistent effects well into adulthood. People that never really seem to land anywhere stable. They don't really quite know what job that they should be trying to get, what kind of training they should be trying to get. They don't have a secure, stable identity, so that they really don't have an anchor that they can use to function effectively in the world. So whether you find yourself at this stage and discover what you want to become, that has a lot to do with whether you actually end up being a happy and productive adult. So overcoming this crisis, in more famous psychology terms, this is called resolving your identity crisis.
Well, once you've learned who you are, you now have to learn how to share yourself with other people. And this is crisis number 6. So it's intimacy versus isolation. So can you learn to commit in relationships? Can you form loyal friendships? Now, if you fail at this, then you're going to feel isolated. You're not going to have that social network that we need. We need others to support us. If you succeed at this challenge, then you will find life to be socially and romantically fulfilling.
Right, and so in adulthood, the result of failing to resolve this crisis is loneliness, and probably one of the major sources of a lot of mental disorder, anxiety and depression, and just feeling like you don't fit in anywhere comes from the failure to resolve this crisis, resulting in an isolation. And remember how important that is for humans. Contact comfort. Humans and other primates. We remember those monkeys that, the monkeys that Harlow did his research on with the wire versus the cloth mother. One of the reasons why they did this research is because the absence of any contact comfort before they started these studies resulted in the death of these monkeys. So that both infant humans And adult humans and monkeys require contact comfort in order to feel safe and happy. And the absence of it can actually lead to quite extreme mental distress. And in those monkey infants actually resulted in their death quite regularly.
Yeah.
So the seventh crisis occurs in middle age, and this is a crisis between generativity versus self-absorption. Now the problem with middle age, a person has settled, maybe they're married, they're settled in a job. Now the question is, do they just get completely bored with their lot in life and unsatisfied with the life that they've ended up with? Or can they keep finding new ways to make things fresh, keep the relationship if they're married with their spouse fresh and interesting, keep the job that they do fresh and interesting? That's generativity. That's keeping a busy life that's creative and interesting despite the fact that you're getting older. And then the alternative to that is the person becoming absorbed in their own thoughts and selfish needs and becoming quite bitter and jaded and just irritated with the whole process of living, just because it's the same stresses and the same irritations day after day after day, and they don't find anything fascinating in their life. So this is an important crisis in middle age, and some people resolve this crisis by having children at this stage. I mean, certainly a very good way to keep life interesting, having to be responsible for children, but of course it's not the only thing that people do in order to resolve this crisis.
Well, the last crisis occurs in old age. And this is the crisis in which you're older now and you look back on your life and you reflect on what you've done. So when you look back on life, do you regret the choices you made? Do you fear death? Or do you accept that, yeah, I did pretty well, made the odd mistake, but I gave it a pretty good shot? So are you happy with how you've lived your life? Or do you regret the decisions you made and you now fear death? So this is this final crisis called ego integrity. So this is where you'd be happy with the life you've led versus despair, where you fear death.
Yeah, do you experience the end of life as full of regret and disappointment, and if I only had more time, maybe I could have made something of myself, versus a sense of satisfaction of having a pretty rich and interesting life and being able to die and let someone else have a chance peacefully. Okay, Erikson's crisis you might think of as a pretty decent list of life's challenges. Independence versus not, autonomy versus not, identity, intimacy, achieving a good sense of one's life at the end stage. I mean, I think that's a pretty decent list of the kind of challenges people face, and Erikson is really nice to present really what the major challenges of life are. He provides clues for, throughout every stage of development, some clues for how a person can develop into a healthy and happy adult. But they don't really reflect, one of the drawbacks is they don't really reflect the sequence in which people do actually meet these challenges. A person might, consider the child that's still living at home in their 30s. They still might be going through these stage of these autonomy-related stages that Erikson thought needed to be resolved much earlier in childhood. A person might have problems with generativity versus self-absorption, or it's also called stagnation. A person might have that challenge several times throughout middle age and old age, always facing the challenge of trying to keep life interesting.
Well, you can imagine identity crisis occurring again if you've worked at one job your whole life, and that's how you define yourself, by your job, what you do, and then you're laid off in your later years. Well, now how do you define yourself? You might have to go through this identity challenge again.
Right, so these crises can emerge at different points in the lifespan, and they don't necessarily occur in the strict sequence that Erikson described, and they don't necessarily occur in the general age range at which Erikson indicated in his theory.
Well, the way you evaluate your life, it isn't just what stage have you gone through, but it's how quickly are you progressing relative to other people. Okay, so your own life is evaluated relative to your peers. And here's a list of some socially defined life transitions. So remember when you got your driver's license? That's a big deal. You want to be 16 and get your driver's license. You might not be as proud of yourself at getting your driver's license if you don't get it till you're in your mid-20s, okay? Because that's something you're supposed to be doing as a teenager.
At least within our culture, the expectation is
Yes.
16 years old, you're working on getting the driver's license. Yeah.
High school graduation is another big life transition, okay? Starting university, graduating university, getting married, having children, buying a house, then having grandchildren, retiring, and of course you must buy a motorhome. Okay, so these are a series of transitions that people go through. And you're always evaluating how well am I doing relative to others. So are you graduating on time? Are you getting married at what you think is an appropriate time? These are all relative to others.
Okay, and these life transitions actually have an effect on lifespan development across time within a culture like ours. So you might actually consider there a new developmental stage emerging just because of the changes in when people get married now versus when they used to get married a few decades ago. So some decades ago, people frequently married before the age of 18, and now people often wait till after 25, and sometimes, I mean, it's much more common for people not to get married at all now than it was a few decades ago. And so that's the difference between just after high school graduation getting married or waiting till having a university degree, for example. So these are adults then, but according to traditional definitions, which sort of emphasize when a person gets married and starts a family as the signature stage of the signature event that makes a person an adult, according to traditional definitions then, adulthood is actually being postponed for several years. And this is part of the reason why Douglas Copeland, a famous Canadian author, defined these generations that are waiting so long to settle down and get married and start families. He referred to them as Generation X, a sort of a lost generation, so that there's an entire new developmental stage in which people are not properly children, certainly, they're 18, but they're not properly adults according to these traditional definitions either. So it's that in that age range, it's sort of a extension of, some people perceive it as an extension of adolescence, where people are still staying at home and still doing the kind of high school things they were doing back when they were 17, well into their 20s. Think about the sitcom Friends, I guess. These people are really postponing the settled, stable part of their life well into their late 20s and even early 30s. So a whole new developmental stage emerging over when people are getting married, and you might wonder why that is. And the Generation X, lost generation idea, people often interpret that to mean that, oh, this is the slacker generation. You know, the generations that started to not bother getting married until much later, we're the slacker generations. We're lazy and we'd rather fool around for a few years before we actually settle down and get to work and have responsibilities. But the true fact of it is that the postponement of marriage and settling down and starting families has more of an economic roots to it, and the author that coined the phrase Generation X and identified this generation made it quite clear that it wasn't their fault, that it was socioeconomic factors that determined it. For example, the complete impossibility for people in their 20s to afford to buy a house that would then allow them to raise children. So these are not slacker generations. They're just poor generations, unable to fully participate in the civilization because they can't afford property, and it's hard to get a good enough job to start a family. So just to give you an idea of the shifts in when people are getting married across the decades, here you got in the 1920s, the age at first marriage was between 24 and 25, and then it was for females, and then for males it's 28. So in the 1920s, the people did have to wait, presumably for economic reasons, before they settled down and got married. But by 1970, the average age that women were getting married was just over 22 and 25 for males. Well, now in 1990, the average was much higher than that, almost 26 for females and 28 almost for males. And of course, these are just averages, so that although in 1970 the average might be about 22 and a half for women to get married, there was whacks of people getting married at ages under 20. So this is virtually unheard of nowadays, at least in the cities cities in Canada and the United States. This is also just an idea of how the shift over time in the perception of actual people and when they've actually succeeded in reaching adulthood. So if you ask 12 to 17-year-olds, have you succeeded in reaching adulthood? About 45% of them say yes and no, and then a good percentage of them say no. 20% only say yes. And then as you move to the 18 to 25-year-old group, the number of people that say yes, they've reached adulthood is still less than half. Now between 26 and 36, about 60% can confidently assert that they've reached adulthood. So there's still about 40% of people, even between ages of 26 and 36, who don't fully consider themselves adults. And it's not really until after a person reaches 36, like myself, that they feel pretty certain that they've reached adulthood. So you can see that just because a person's graduated high school, that they're even their self-perception doesn't include them in the category of adulthood. So although these life transitions are meant to define adulthood, the culture's perception and the people's perception themselves is quite flexible, and it's not the case that everybody turns 18 and then unanimously is treated as adults and feels like adults.
Okay, now we're going to talk about midlife crisis, or an empty nest syndrome. I'm sure many of you have heard about this. So the idea with the empty nest syndrome is that as soon as the children leave home after they turn 18, or whatever age they now are when they leave home, that it's devastating for the parents. They're really upset and life just goes downhill. Well, the truth is they followed 8,000 people between the ages of 35 and 65 for 10 years. And the results showed that this age, 35 to 65, was the happiest and most productive. Okay, when people did feel a crisis at this stage, they were upset, it wasn't because the children left home. It was most often because they either lost their job or they lost their spouse. But the children actually leaving home was greeted as a positive event, and this new opportunity for them, the freedom they now had to explore new adventures.
Generativity.
That's right. So here's a chart, and it's just the respondents indicating that their marriage is going well. Okay, so we have wives are the green line and husbands are the blue line. And as you can see, couples are the happiest and they think their marriage is going best in the very beginning and at the end. During that stage where the kids are school-aged or the children are teenagers, this is the lowest point in the marriage. It's not that this is the happiest time for the marriage. Okay? In fact, it's when those children leave the home that the marriage starts improving. So the emptiness syndrome does not exist.
Right, and it makes you wonder what is going on with these families with school-aged children and with teenagers. Well, they've got all of this extra work being laid on them and extra pressure being responsible for school-aged children and teenagers, which makes you wonder why parents schedule so vigorously their children's activities so that they're running around all over town, driving them to all these different activities. That can only do only add stress to a person's life and make it less enjoyable to be married or to have a family at all. So I guess my advice, I think it's sensible advice, is don't overschedule your children. You'll drive them crazy. It will make them do more, have more pressure than they probably need, since they're working through enough in these developmental stages that they don't need to be overworked, really. And it'll also cause the parents so much stress just trying to juggle all of their children's activities. I know a number of parents that spend their entire weekend just running around taking their kids to things.
Okay, so now we're going to talk about the other life transition in middle age, menopause. Okay, this tends to occur between 45 and 55. And generally there are some uncomfortable symptoms, physical symptoms like hot flashes, but they're only severe in about 10% of the women. Now, emotionally, 97% of women view menopause positively, or they really don't care at all. So where did this idea come that it causes depression? Well, it was based on a few women who had had early menopause following a hysterectomy, or they had a lifetime of depression. So for these women, it was viewed more negatively, and the idea that it was depressing and very traumatizing. But generally for women, it's not viewed as this negative life transition. It's viewed more positively.
It's another example of how a few cases can be distorted into the rule in terms of the public's view of human psychology. So a few women demonstrated to have some negative consequences from menopause gets established as the rule for all women. That's the availability heuristic again. Ease of coming up with examples leads to an overestimation of the likelihood of an experience or a certain event occurring. Okay, now we're going to really talk about old age, this final stage of the lifespan. Now, it's not really considered one stage of life because by now a number of people actually reach it to age 100. So traditionally 60 is a decent age to start the early stages of seniorhood, but then that would span 40 years all the way up to 100. So often they develop the old age into three separate stages: a young old stage in which somebody's between 60 and 75, the old stage between 75 and 85, and the oldest of the old, the 85-year-olds or over. Now, there's no doubt that as a person ages and into old age, they do lose some abilities, that they do lose some psychological abilities. And there are some mental functions that are most likely to define as a gradual result of age. And it's not just old age, I should note, that pretty much from mid-20s on, a gradual decline occurs in these mental abilities. So formal reasoning is going to take a hit gradually over time. Speed of perception, both because of mental processing and also because your eyes and your ears and your sensory organs get a little less, well, sensitive to the information out there. Not surprising, older people tend to have a hard time hearing and seeing. And there's also an impairment gradually for recently learned information. Just generally the ability to acquire new knowledge gradually declines as a person ages. And remember, this is called fluid intelligence. So fluid intelligence is the ability to acquire knowledge of new things, things that you didn't know before, new skills, and the ability to solve unfamiliar problems that you've never encountered before. And this fluid intelligence definitely does decline gradually as a function of age. However, don't challenge your grandfather to a game of Scrabble, because there's certain things that don't really decline much with age and might actually get enhanced as a result of advancing age. So verbal ability, for example, is one of the few skills that older people are on average much better than younger people. They just know more words and they just have better skills with their language. And so don't challenge grandfather to Scrabble. And their arithmetic ability, that doesn't decline with age. Basically, any skill that a person acquired previously, knowledge that they've had before, won't really decline, won't decline until the very, very advanced stages of old age. And that's called crystallized intelligence. More or less preserved until way deep into the end of a person's lifespan if they live a good long time.
Some of the senility that's associated with old age has a lot to do with the medication these senior citizens are taking. So they can be over-medicated, and this can lead to that senility. And with their physical abilities, 70% of the physical losses they experience, are behaviorally based. It's because of their sedentary lifestyles that they develop this weakness and some of these physical problems.
Right, so it's not just aging alone, there's also these special factors that seniors, that can cause mental impairments in seniors that don't really have much to do with aging per se. They're just related to aging, medication such as. Okay, so this is just a graph to give you an idea of the percentage of elderly maintaining these skills for over 7 years, for the following 7 years. So up to age 60, I guess that would be from 53 to age 60, the number of seniors preserving verbal abilities, it just goes down to about 65%. So that's to age 81. So in the 7 years before age 81, only about 35% of those old people are going to lose this verbal ability, whereas other abilities decline at a much faster rate. These are all generally crystallized intelligence abilities. So you can see that a lot of old people are going to have completely preserved these skills even at that advanced age of between 74 and 81. Well, during childhood, while more obvious changes in physical development do occur, so do changes in cognitive sophistication. And so Erikson focused on the life challenges across from birth to death. Other researchers in developmental psychology have focused on how your thought processes get more and more sophisticated and particularly across childhood. So in other words, it's just a truism that people's minds will work differently depending on the age that they are. And so the way you think depends in part on your age. And that was the focus of Jean Piaget's research. One of the most famous psychologists ever is French psychologist who studied his own children and really watched how they progressed through their childhood and came up with some hugely influential theories about how people develop their mental sophistication gradually across childhood. So the capacity, his idea for complex abstract thought increases as a child gains more and more experiences with the world. They have more things happen to them. They learn more things based on their interactions with the world. And these changes can be seen as following a sequence of stages, just like Erikson's idea.
However, the way the child learns about the world and progresses through these stages occurs through two different processes. The first one is assimilation. So this is fitting new experiences into what you already understand about the world. And these are called cognitive schemas. So imagine you're a young child and you see a dog. And your parents say, "This is a doggy." You're like, "Doggy." And then you see another dog. The child goes, "Doggy." You go, "Right." They've now assimilated. So they've now fit into their new experiences into what they already understand about the world. Accommodation is when you have to alter your understanding of the world to make it consistent with new experiences. So imagine you the child sees a dog, you say dog, they say, "Oh, look at the doggy." But then they see a cat. They go, "Doggy." You're like, "That's not a doggy, that's a cat." So now they go, "Cat." They've had to alter their understanding of the world, in this case, their concept of dog, to not include cat. So this would be accommodation.
Well, the first stage of development starts from birth and goes till around age 2, and it's called the sensory motor stage. And all of the learning in this stage really relies on the baby's born innate motor reflexes. The sucking reflexes, arms flailing around, grasping, and thought is really tied to these actions that the learning progresses by body movements having some result on the objects in the environment. So the baby flails its arm and then knocks something off a table. There's nothing more interesting to babies than if their action causes some catastrophe. They will be fascinated by it. They like to throw stuff and see where they go. So that's just them using these basic motor reflexes and then noticing their effect on the environment. And then that's when the baby learns. Okay, I just did this by accident and look what happened. Remember the cats that get stuck in the puzzle box and they hit a button and then boom, they escape the puzzle box and there they are, they're out getting the food. Well, it's kind of like that. The baby's witnessing consequences of their actions and they're learning something about the nature of themselves and how the effect that they can have on the world. But all of the knowledge acquired at this stage has to do with these concrete actions and events that occur within the baby's sight, within the baby's sensory awareness. Okay? And in fact, it's so extreme are infants at this stage tied to the physical sensations that they have and the behaviors that they engage in and the effects that they directly have on the environment that the baby can witness. They actually don't conceive of anything existing outside of their own awareness that they can't directly sense through their eyes or by hearing. So they really experience the world as things that are out of sight don't even exist to them anymore.
And that's why the major accomplishment of this stage is object permanence. So newborn babies, when you take their toy away and hide it from them, they won't look for it. Okay, so as soon as it's out of sight, it's out of mind. If they can't see it, it's gone. And if there's a young baby you know that's under 6 months of age, you can try this.
It's so fun.
We
they
did
really
it so
just
many
put it under
times.
a blanket and then they act like it never existed. They just look away. Something that they loved playing with. Put a blanket over it and they just forget about it immediately.
But at about 6 months of age, they develop object permanence and now they're going to search for that hidden toy. Okay, so imagine at about 5 months, you put a blanket over their favorite toy, they act like it never existed. You do that at around 6 or 7 months, all of a sudden they're going to rip that blanket off. They want their toy back. But think about what that means. Now they can represent objects mentally, okay? Things that they couldn't even conceive of before. If it was out of sight, it was out of mind. Now they can represent things mentally and symbolically. And this is a huge step for children.
And in fact, the ability to speak and use language would not be possible without it, because talking about things requires you to often talk about objects that aren't physically present right now. So you can't learn the ability to talk about very much until you're able to actually represent something in your mind that isn't physically there in the environment.
Well, if you don't have a young baby around that you can do this with to demonstrate object permanence, you can look at the video illustration. It's link number 4 in the Unit 7 links folder.
Now, stage 2 of the process is the pre-operational stage, and this is the sort of intermediate stage that the child's transitioning into a more abstract ability to reason and use logic and think abstractly. That's the ultimate goal of that a person will reach in adolescence and early adulthood, is the ability to really think in complex ways about abstract ideas. Well, this is sort of the transition stage, and what it involves is an increase in the ability to reason symbolically. So just building on the object permanence, becoming better and better at thinking about things that aren't physically there. So the child can pretend about objects and have tea parties. That becomes possible at this age between 2 and 7. So they can imagine a lot of quite detailed scenarios that don't actually exist in the situation. And this ability to pretend becomes increasingly complex, and pretending probably a very important process for developing the ability to think and practicing the ability to think in symbolic and abstract ways. That'll become so important later. But children at this stage, they're unable to perform mental operations. That's the achievement of later stages. Mental operations involve reasoning in a number of steps of logic. Like multi-step math problems will be too much for children at this stage. And some very complicated set of reasoning steps that might surround arguing in favor of some opinion, like should we accept genetically altered food, or opinions about pro-choice versus anti-abortion issues, controversies. Children, this is going to be much too much for children to handle, because there's just so many layers of logic that go into developing these opinions of controversial issues.
Yeah, children can really only focus on one salient aspect. So they'll pick one aspect in order to reason. And you can see this if you take 5 quarters, take 10 quarters and set them up into 2 rows of 5, but have them the exact same length and ask which is more. They'll say they're the same, but then space out the quarters in one of the rows so that it's longer, and then ask which is more, and they'll go by the length of the line instead of by the number of objects. So to them, that's enough to say that it's more. It's longer, it must be more then.
Piaget noted that children at this stage, they're not completely bound to their sensory information that's available. They have the object permanence ability, but they're still pretty egocentric. That is to say, they find it very difficult to understand another's perspective. And a good example of this has to do with intention. A child at this stage will hear a story about another child who accidentally broke a vase by accident versus one who took the vase and smashed it on the floor on purpose. And if you ask children at this stage which is the child that should get punished more, they will say they should get punished equally, despite the fact that one knocked it over accidentally and the other intentionally threw it on the floor and smashed it. So they find it difficult to understand those complexities of another person's perspective. And another series of abilities that has to do with egocentrism is the development of a theory of mind. So children will often have an inability to appreciate the new perspective that another child might have. One famous example is researchers put a child in front of a box that said pencils on it. So there was a bunch of pictures of pencils on it. It said pencils, and then they opened it up and there was candy inside. Okay, so the child now knows it says pencils on the box, but there's candy inside. And then they introduce they tell a story about another child who comes in the room and has never seen the box before, and asks the child, what do you think the child will think is in the box? And the child will think, well, that other child will think there's candy in the box. Even though the researchers tell them that this other child has never seen the box before until just now. So they find it really hard to break away from their own perspective. They know there's candy in the box, so they assume that anybody else that encounters the box will be aware that there's candy. Another problem in terms of reasoning that children at this age have is they haven't developed the ability to understand the concept of conservation of matter. The idea is that amounts don't change just because their physical appearance changes. So the quarters are a good example that Lana mentioned. And then imagine 2 glasses of water, but they differ in their thickness. Okay, so imagine a glass that's full of water and it's long and thin. And then there's a shorter and stouter glass beside it. And you let the child look at the different glasses of water, and you say, what if I pour this water into the other glass? And then you do that, and then you ask them, is there more water in that glass, or?
Well, you can even do it where you have them right at the very beginning.
Right.
You will pour water and then into the 2 different glasses that are identical in size and say, are they the same? And sometimes the kids will say, oh, you need a little bit more water in this one. So they're actively involved in making sure the amounts are exactly equal. So then you put the water jug aside and you say, okay, they're completely equal. The child's like, yes, they're equal. And then you just take another glass that has a different shape, so it can be long and thin instead of these short, stout glasses. And then in front of the child, you take that cup of water and you pour it into the new glass. And you put them side by side. You say, which one has more, or are they the same? And they point to the tall glass, the tall, thin glass. Because it's higher up, it looks like there's more, that means there must be more. Even though they were the ones who decided the waters were equal amounts, and they saw the water just get poured into the glass. With none being added and none being taken away, they still make this error. It's really fun to do to kids.
Yeah, and we did it with our own daughter. It works very well between these ages, but then there's a point where they don't fall for it anymore.
Yes.
Okay, so that if you want a video demonstration, this kind of failures to appreciate conservation of matter, this demonstration that children can be fooled by their perceptions. If it looks taller, then it must be more, even though they witnessed that it can't possibly be more. That if you want to see some video demonstrations of this, see links number 5 and number 6 in the Unit 7 links folder.
So stage 3 is the concrete operations stage, and this is between ages 7 and 12. Now at this stage, their thought processes are tied to concrete experiences, and they don't have the capacity for abstract thought. This means that their learning is tied to these concrete experiences. So the idea that learning could be caused by changes in neural connections, kids would have a tough time with this because they can't link it to any of their own personal experiences. It's too abstract. However, at this stage, they start to understand sophisticated concepts like conservation of matter. So now they would, if you did this same demonstration and you poured the water into the other cup, they'd say, of course it's the same. They'd think you were stupid for even asking, even though a couple of years before they wouldn't have gotten this. And now they can also perform these mental operations. So imagine a child in the previous stage. If you asked them if 2 times 6 was the same as 6 times 2, then probably wouldn't get it right because that would be a reversible operation. Okay, that 2 times 6 is the same as 6 times 2. But at this stage, they can start to understand that. They can start to do these mental calculations. So now they could solve, for example, a multi-step math problem.
Now the final stage is stage 4, the formal operations stage, and this is the signature achievement of humans in terms of their cognitive abilities. Between age 12 and adulthood, people are going to reach this formal operations stage in which they are capable of pretty sophisticated abstract reasoning, thinking about justice, thinking about concepts like liberty and freedom, and being able to identify different types of events that they might witness in the world and be able to categorize them as more or less relevant in terms of their implications for liberty, freedom, independence, justice. All this deep thinking emerges in some people during their teenage years, and others might take a bit longer, but most people get this ability to reason formally in a sophisticated way. So one of the implications of this ability to reason is that you can imagine how the world could be, organized in a way that there was less suffering in it and more justice. You can reason about future events, scenarios. The consequences of action become easier to appreciate, and as I said, abstract concepts. So this often makes teenagers a little bit insufferable because they can describe a world that's different from the ones that the earlier generations created, and they can ask, why in the world didn't you set things up better than it is in a more just and world with less suffering, and why'd you have to ruin the environment so badly? So they imagine a better world, and then they can often blame the preceding generations for the mess that they've made of things. If you would like to see a video demonstration of abstract reasoning in adolescence, look at link number 7 in the Unit 7 links folder.
So this is just a summary of the different stages. So stage 1 is the sensory motor period. This is birth to 2 years. And here we see the coordination of sensory input and motor responses, and the development of object permanence. That's at about 6 months. Stage 2 is the pre-operational period, and this is the development of symbolic thought marked by irreversibility, centration, and egocentrism. So centration is just focusing on one salient aspect, like the length of a row versus the number of items in a row. Okay, that's centration. And irreversibility is just not recognizing that 2 times 6 would be the same as 6 times 2. Stage 3 is the concrete operational period, and this is mental operations are applied to concrete events and mastery of conservation and hierarchical classification. And this is between 7 to 11 years. And the final stage is stage 4, the formal operational period. This is age 11 through adulthood. And now mental operations are applied to abstract ideas, and there's logical, systematic thinking.
Right, the previous slide said that starts at age 12. It doesn't really matter. The point is that late adolescent, or pretty much the onset of puberty to adulthood is when this stage is going to be developing. And a person's going to reach that stage somewhere in that age range. There's some problems with Piaget's approach. For example, a lot of these stage models have the same problems, that these cognitive abilities often don't develop in discrete stages. In different areas, a person might be developing the conservation matter in one area and not another. So it doesn't seem to be the case that a person acquires all of these abilities in such a nice sequence. It's more like a stops and starts process where a person might have sophisticated abilities in one domain, like the verbal domain, but not so much in the mathematic domain. And so it's not such a coherent, stepwise process as Piaget described. And often the speed of development, of cognitive development, doesn't follow a nice pattern according to the ages that Piaget described, because the complexity of thought that emerges in a person does depend on the environment that they're raised in. So that nurture influence again, that more mental stimulation for a child is going to cause them to progress through these developmental achievement of these developmental skills more rapidly than some other child. And it turns out also that cognitive abilities might actually progress faster than Piaget thought. There's some evidence that children, infants between 2.5 and 3.5 months of age, have acquired some understanding of object permanence. One of the problems with Piaget's studies is it required the child to try to grab and try to get at the object after it's hidden. Well, babies don't really have very strong motor abilities to chase after objects until about age 6 months. So if you use other measures of whether they understand object permanence, then you can show evidence for it between 2.5 and 3.5 months. And one of the ways they do this is they, for example, they show an object passing, they show babies an object passing behind a screen, and then it never actually comes out the other side. And they measure how often babies look in shock at the fact that the thing didn't come out the other side. And that they use as evidence that the baby must, because they sort of look more like they think that's bizarre, because they look more at it, the inference is they must know that something's gone wrong, that the object does in some sense exist to them after it's disappeared. And there's evidence that they understand a lot of other things about objects, like objects can't pass through other objects or magically change locations or hang in midair. And so by about 4 months, by measuring the likelihood of looking at objects doing these crazy things and them staring at it, it's a measure of, do the babies consider that a bizarre thing to happen? And it seems that they do.
Well, it also appears that children can take another's perspective much earlier than Piaget thought. So they measured the way a 4-year-old, well, different 4-year-olds, would speak to 2-year-olds compared to how they would speak to adults. And they would adjust their language depending on who they were speaking to. So they'd speak differently to these 2-year-olds than they would the adults. Now, if they didn't appreciate the other person's perspective, there would be no reason for them to change the way they speak. 4-year-olds also know that other people have their own feelings and beliefs, and that these are going to influence their behavior. And this idea about how our mind works and how other people's minds work is called the theory of mind.
Right. And seems like quite young children can appreciate and take the perspective and appreciate and have an understanding of what's going on in another's mind earlier than Piaget thought. It should note that it reads here egocentrism emerges earlier than Piaget thought, that that's not accurate. It's movement away from pure egocentrism that's actually emerging earlier than Piaget thought. Egocentrism is that inability to take other people's perspective. So a little error on the slide there. Also, some problem, cognitive development it depends on education and culture, and it doesn't only depend on the progression through stages. So there was this researcher named Lev Vygotsky who was interested in language and as private speech that people engage in, and as a mechanism that culture can exert an influence over developmental progress, that language actually controls the kinds of thought processes a person engages in, so that the cognitive abilities that a child acquires depends on the experiences provided by education and what culture they live in, because that's what gives them the verbal skills that they use to think with. Okay? So that the ability to reason cognitively in a verbal way will be most likely in a culture like ours that heavily trains our children in verbal skills. Other cultures that favor the development of different abilities, like spatial abilities in nomadic hunting cultures, they'll prefer those abilities over knowledge of conservation of quantities, math-related abilities, and verbal-related abilities. And so those children will develop spatial abilities at a faster rate than these other abilities that Western children acquire so quickly. And then the fifth problem is that some people never develop the capacity for abstract thought in the way that Piaget expected, that is characteristic of that final formal operation stage. So some people never quite progress beyond that third stage of cognitive abilities. Now, Jean Piaget's interest was in cognitive development and how people learn the ability to think in more and more sophisticated ways. Others were interested in the morality development that occurs in children. Now, the ultimate goal, as far as society is concerned for children's development, it's important that they know how to think, but it's also important that they behave themselves and act in socially responsible ways. They're not criminals, etc. So the idea is that Jean Piaget put forward is that along with the cognitive sophistication that develops throughout childhood, reasoning about moral issues also develops in tandem. Cognitive complexity is what allows children to be able to reason about moral issues properly, and then that means that children will become more and more sophisticated in terms of their moral reasoning across time as they develop their cognitive abilities. For example, very young children don't recognize that negative outcomes caused by intentional actions are worse than accidents, but older children can appreciate that difference, and I mentioned that before. Breaking a vase, you describe to a very young children that some other child broke a vase and you say that they did it on purpose versus they did it by accident, that young child can't distinguish between those two events, and they think that the child that broke the vase should get punished equally regardless of their intention.
So Lawrence Kohlberg was one of the researchers who investigated morality and how it develops. So according to Kohlberg, while children do progress through these stages of cognitive development, they also progress through stages of moral development. And you can measure someone's moral development by how they answer questions to hypothetical moral dilemmas.
So Lawrence Kohlberg just presented people with a number of moral dilemmas, and he based on the decisions that they'd make in these dilemmas. And one example is your wife is dying of some disease and she really needs medicine in order to survive, a certain type of medicine, but it's too expensive for you. You don't have the money to pay for it. So what do? Do you steal it? Do you just not steal it and allow her to die because of the lack of access to the medicine? So how you would respond to a pretty difficult dilemma like that, a hypothetical dilemma like that, Lawrence Kohlberg would assign you into a certain stage of moral development. And in using these techniques, he identified the earliest form of morality, which is associated with children, pretty much from birth till around the age of puberty. And the idea here is that very young children, they'll obey the rules just because they fear punishment. So the only thing that's driving young children to obey and to behave themselves is the fear of being punished for wrongdoings. And at this stage, according to Kohlberg, children lack empathy, virtually lack empathy, and all that is an awareness of other people's feelings and how a person's actions can affect how another person feels. It's a very important aspect of morality. A lot of more empathy is associated with more moral and sensitive behaviors in dealing with others. And these children are hedonistic, which means that they do whatever maximizes their pleasure, and they avoid whatever action will cause them unpleasantness and pain. So that's the pleasure principle. Do things that enhance your pleasure, avoid things that you don't like and are unpleasant. So this is the stage that children are at. They really only care about reward and punishment, and they don't have the cognitive sophistication to have any appreciation for other people's feelings.
Well, conventional morality tends to emerge around 11 and 12, and here the key achievements are the development of empathy and loyalty. So empathy, of course, is behaviors are wrong if they cause harm to others. So you can appreciate someone else's feelings, and if your actions are going to harm someone else, that's going to make you feel bad. So this would be empathy. Loyalty is your behavior is going to be influenced by your obligations to your family and friends. Now later on, a sense of social obligation also emerges. And this is when children begin to appreciate the importance of maintaining order through obedience to laws, and that there have to be punishment when the laws are broken.
So here, however, in conventional morality, it's the laws that the government decides that determines what's right or wrong and what's a behavior that you can engage in versus what you shouldn't engage in. And so it's very much defined by authority figures, either the police, the government, or parents. They determine what morality is, and children at this stage think that their sole goal is to make sure they follow that line as far as what other people tell them not to do. Now, in post-conventional morality, according to Kohlberg, this is a stage of moral development that many people never reach. Only some adults will ever reach this stage of morality, according to Kohlberg. And the central achievements of this stage of morality are social conscience. So here, the laws that exist that the government has passed and deemed immoral behaviors, some of the laws themselves may not be moral, and as a result, a person at this stage considers themselves within their rights to oppose or even break the laws. So that it's not just authority figures determine morality. To a certain extent, an individual can determine by their own conscience what moral versus immoral behaviors are, and can come to disagreements with people in authority about this. Okay? So that a person will abandon, for example, their parents' sense of what morality is if their own conscience conflicts with what their parents think is moral versus immoral behavior, similar to one's relation with the government that passes the laws. And it's an appreciation at this stage by just a few people that reach this stage that morality is a complicated thing. It's not just legally defined. That justice is not something that is perfectly defined by the laws that exist in a society. Instead, morality is something that warrants consideration chronically, always reflecting on whether the way a society is organized is the most just and moral way for a society to be organized. And so people that reach this stage will come up against authority figures as far as disagreements in terms of the definition of morality is concerned. So laws then, for people like this, they're not set in stone, but there can be changes to make society more just or more appropriate given the changes that occur in a modern world. People may differ also. People appreciate at this stage that folks may differ in their beliefs about morality. So social rules should accommodate a reasonable range of moral beliefs. And so one example is the legalization of marijuana. So some people might be vigorously opposed to any kind of drug use, any kind of psychoactive drug use. Many other people will not consider that an immoral behavior. And people that have reached a post-conventional morality, even if they don't agree with the use of marijuana, will come to agree in some cases that the laws do not conform to morality. They might actually be an infringement on a person's individual rights to choose what kind of behaviors to engage in. So a person at this stage of morality is going to appreciate that there's differences in terms of across people in terms of what they view as moral versus immoral, and that quite a broad range of moral beliefs can be acceptable as long as we all agree on a certain set of obvious immoral behaviors, things related to injustice, discrimination, sexual coercion, murder, that kind of thing, pedophilia. People at this post-conventional morality, it would be bizarre for them to consider those obvious cases of immoral behavior, but that after you get rid of a certain list of obviously immoral behaviors, that there's quite a broad range of what a person might think of as acceptable, and a free society should make accommodation for that range of beliefs. So here's just a kind of a timeline. If a person does ultimately reach the post-conventional level of morality, everybody, according to Colbert, starts in any case at this first stage where you're really oriented towards avoiding punishment. So anything you do is that if you don't do an immoral act, if you don't hit that other kid, then the reason why you're not doing it is because you fear the punishment that might arise. Stage 2, you start getting oriented towards rewards so that people will be motivated to engage in behaviors that get rewarded, and any kind of negative behavior that wouldn't be rewarded would be avoided as a result of that. So this is the hedonism influence. Avoid pain, maximize pleasure. Now, stage 3 and 4, the focus is on being a good boy or a good girl from the relative to the authorities. So what's right or wrong is determined by parents' approval or disapproval, other family members' approval or disapproval, and moral behavior is controlled largely by the definition of right and wrong by people within the person's family. Now, stage 4, there'll be an emergence of an appreciation for society's rules and laws, and a person's moral behavior will be defined by what the society as a whole determines moral versus immoral behaviors to be. Now in stage 5, this is the post-conventional level. The earliest stage here is the social contract orientation, and right versus wrong behaviors get determined by society's rules, but society doesn't always get it right, and in some cases can consider something an immoral behavior. The individual can disagree with that and may choose not to follow society's rules in some cases. And now in stage 6, a person's individual principles and conscience determine their morality, so they will completely ignore society's rules. I mean, if you're at this highest stage, then you consider yourself as good a judge as to what moral versus immoral behavior is, and you might completely abandon your government and the decisions it makes in passing laws. And in some cases, if your government deviates considerably from your own morality, you might break ranks with the entire society and start protest movements and stuff like that. So think about people like Gandhi or Nelson Mandela or Martin Luther King, who will note the injustices in their society and they can't live with them any longer. That they in their hearts know that the way a society is organized is wrong, and they actually are motivated to fight to correct these injustices within society. So here the right and wrong is determined by abstract ethical principles like freedom, like equality, etc. Equal rights, human rights, that emphasize equity and justice, and that a person will be quite willing to oppose their government if the government starts to infringe on these ethical principles and violate them. Okay, so you can see across ages with these hypothetical dilemmas, Kohlberg noted responses that conform to each of these different stages of moral development. So at age 7, you can see that nobody's making post-conventional responses to these dilemmas that would fit into the post-conventional morality. And few 7-year-olds are even making conventional judgments based on these dilemmas. Most of them are at the pre-conventional stage, so focusing on punishments and rewards. Well, you can see that this declines gradually between age 7 and 16, so that 16-year-olds, only 20% are reasoning about these dilemmas at the pre-conventional stage. The conventional stage is generally increasing across this time span, and you can see a slight increase in the post-conventional reasoning. By 16, only about 30% of people are responding to these dilemmas at a post-conventional stage of moral reasoning. And according to Kohlberg, this line doesn't get much higher, that probably the majority of people never ever develop the ability to reason at this post-conventional stage.
Okay, well, we're going to go through a few problems with Kohlberg's stages. The first one is whether or not it's actual moral stage or verbal sophistication that determines how you do on these hypothetical dilemmas. So remember, your stage of moral development is determined by the type of answer you give to these hypothetical moral dilemmas. Well, the better vocabulary you have and the more educated individuals were more likely to give more complex answers for these moral reasoning questions. So it's these more complex answers that are getting them placed in these higher categories. So the stage of moral reasoning is now highly associated with higher education. So is it actual moral development or is it education?
Although it's hard to know if that really is a problem, because with greater verbal sophistication, that reflects greater cognitive skill development, which we expect to be associated with greater moral development. So that might not be, is it moral development or verbal sophistication? Those two things might go hand in hand. And higher education, incidentally, by that view, may actually improve a person's moral development. And more people do end up that have a university degree, for example, they do fall into that post-conventional stage more frequently. So education might actually improve a person's moral development. Another problem with Kohlberg's stages is that it's the greater culture determines the values that form the basis of moral reasoning often. And so that means that people won't, throughout the world, follow the same sequence in progression of moral development through these stages. So, for example, concern for others' well-being over one's own develops much earlier in collectivist cultures such as China. And these are cultures in which a person evaluates themselves and whether they're moral in relation to other people. Their actions are motivated by helping a larger group and helping, for example, their family flourish as opposed to themselves. Individualist cultures like Canada and the United States emphasize more motivations to enhance one's own prestige and one's own level of resources, independent of anybody else. So there's a broad difference between cultures, and that determines the type of sequence of moral development people will go through and how quickly they progress through moral development and the different aspects of moral development.
And at every age, people will apply morality differently across different situations. So with these moral dilemmas, people respond with multiple stages and not just one. So think about this. Would you ever speed? It's against the law. Well, you probably would speed. We've all probably done it at some point or another, so you're breaking a rule. Is that immoral? You probably don't think it is. Maybe that falls into a higher stage of moral development. What about drinking or cheating? Okay, when you will engage in one criminal activity but not another, it suggests this double standard of morality.
Yeah, and people often, when it's themselves, they often make lots of compelling excuses for why they might have broken some moral rule that exists. Don't cheat on your partner, don't speed through a red light, that kind of thing. When it's described in a hypothetical dilemma, as Kohlberg presented, they can be quite conservative. Oh, it's wrong. But they themselves out in the world might actually engage in these behaviors and then reduce how guilty they feel about it because of the kind of excuses that they'll provide.
And that actually leads into this next issue. Your moral reasoning is very different from your moral behavior. And this is the words are cheap effect. So it's really easy in a hypothetical dilemma to say, I'd never do that. But what if you were in the situation? So one study was done at a university where they asked men, the male university students, would you rape a woman if you knew you would get away with it? A third of the men of these university students agreed that they would do it, although they would have all said that it was wrong on these hypothetical dilemmas. Okay, so what you say you'll do and what you do can be two very different things.
Or even what you say is wrong and what you're willing to do can be two different things. A person can say it's a wrong behavior and still even be aware that they themselves might engage in it. So that's a bit alarming, I think. It does sort of water down the usefulness of Kohlberg's research somewhat because they're based on these hypothetical dilemmas instead of actual behaviors. So beyond moral reasoning, ensuring that people engage in moral behavior depends not only on the development of their cognitive reasoning abilities, but it also is an emotional component as well. Moral emotions like guilt, shame, and empathy really drive people to behave themselves and to behave in ways that are responsible, that don't cause too much damage to other people. So what these emotions do is they provide a really useful internal signal about whether the behavior you're engaging in is right or wrong. So a person will do something, they'll hit somebody, and then they'll feel really guilty, and they'll feel shame, and they'll feel sorry for the person who has to put up with that kind of abuse. And now the next time they get the urge to hit somebody, they'll have all this internal signal that, the last time that happened, I felt so bad, I'm not going to bother doing it again. So instead of getting directly punished, these internal emotions drive us toward moral behavior, even in the absence of anybody around to punish us. So this is ourselves punishing us for the wrongdoings. Now, how do we get people to generate these kind of emotions that might cause them to be as moral as they possibly can? Because any violations of the morality that they have in them will just cause them to feel so guilty that it's just not worth it. In fact, some people that have internalized their morality in this way, they can punish themselves more severely than other people are capable of punishing them. So this is the ideal as far as moral development goes. Get people to have these internal signals telling them right versus wrong. There's a lot of threats, though, to the internalization of morality that exists throughout childhood, and a lot of it has to do with parenting. So we know, for example, that parenting that's primarily through what's called power assertion is a disaster as far as the internalization of morality and allowing people to develop these internal signals to control their behavior. Power assertion is controlling a child's behavior solely with threats, physical punishment, taking away privileges. So it's punishment, and there really isn't any rewards for good behavior to counteract it. There's just this power assertion, do it because I said so, kind of attitude of parents, actually impairs a child's ability to develop moral reasoning and these internal signals that would guide moral behavior. Now, punishing parental behavior not contingent on bad behavior by the child is also an utter disaster when it comes to the internalization of morality. Punishment is a good thing, can be a good thing if it's, and we've talked about this a bit before, it can be a good thing if it's accompanied with good explanations for why the behavior is wrong and rewards for good behavior. But when the child hasn't really done anything wrong and they're getting punished, then the child has no motive to do the right thing. And as a result, they never really internalize through their development those internal signals when they do something wrong and they feel guilty. The child can end up not have the child's negative feelings can end up having no relation to whether their behavior is actually moral or not. So random shouting, spanking, slapping, taking away privileges as more out of frustration or to exert power and dominance than to correct the child's behavior is a complete disaster. And think about why parents might do this. Well, quite often it's the little ones with no power and no strength that take the brunt of an adult's frustration. They can't yell at their boss, for example, so they'll yell at their children. And that's unfortunately a natural human response that parents have a responsibility, however, to control, but it's a complete disaster when it comes to moral development in children.
And here you can see some of the consequences of relying simply on power assertion. So there's a higher tendency for these children to be physically aggressive. Okay? They also don't appreciate the feelings of others. And they don't internalize these moral standards. So they're not going to engage in socially acceptable behaviors unless there's a threat of punishment. Okay? So they don't have that urge to stop themselves because they feel guilty or they feel shame if they're about to engage in some socially unacceptable behavior because they haven't internalized these emotions. So they only resist this urge when there is this threat of punishment.
And ultimately, the parents won't be in control of a child's behavior. So it really is essential for the adult the child becomes to have internalized these internal signals that tell them when they're doing something wrong. Otherwise, there won't really be any motive.
And this can lead into that cycle of violence. So if you're never taught to internalize these behaviors, moral reasoning,
that violence is inappropriate, yeah, then you'll be more likely to use violence as a technique to get your way as an adult if power assertion has been the only thing that you were exposed to as a child. So spare the rod, spoil the child is actually probably one of the worst proverbs ever existed. Wouldn't you say?
Yes.
Okay, so aids to internalization of morality. How do we get children to have these internal signals built in so that when they're adults, they behave themselves? Well, you want to do parenting with what's called induction. So what this does is it controls a child's behavior, not through power assertion, through force, through aggression, and because you're bigger and louder. It involves controlling a child's behavior by appealing just to their desire to be helpful and please their parents. Children are not little monsters that must constantly be dominated. They are concerned humans that really want their basic needs met, and they want to feel safe and loved. Remember the contact comfort that if you don't get it and you're a monkey or a human, especially in infancy, you won't survive. So children want to be loved, and they want to fit into their family, and they want to feel like a happy part of a group. So parents can use this natural tendency in children to guide appropriate behaviors. Explanations of why behaviors is wrong and why in our family this is not the kind of thing we do and these are the reasons why. It's that kind of discussion and conversations that will make a child develop a healthy morality. And as we told you, dominance and threats of punishment and physical punishment, aggression, these are horrible ways to get children to internalize morality.
Okay, so with inductive discipline, punishments and admonishments are contingent on inappropriate behavior. You're not going to punish your child when they haven't done anything wrong just because you had a bad day. Okay, they're not there to be the whipping post that you can just take out all your frustrations on. You don't punish them unless they've done something. And if they have engaged in a behavior that's wrong, you explain to them why their behavior is wrong by referencing their own safety or other people's feelings, but you're providing this explanation. And you're communicating it with a sense of being concerned, that you want to guide the child. It's not just trying to dominate the child. Okay? It's for guidance and not dominance. So internalization is best achieved with the parent in the role as a caring teacher. So you're trying to lovingly guide your child through all of the different challenges of learning what's appropriate and what's not appropriate.
Yeah, and so it's surprising that more parents choose the power assertion route as far as raising of children. And why would they do that? Why would a person choose punishments and aggression and dominance over treating the child as a partner in a almost a teacher-student relationship, where the parent is the guide in helping the child get a better appreciation, a growing appreciation for how to behave properly and how to live their life in productive ways. It's surprising that parents choose power assertion instead, but I think there's two reasons for that. The first reason is that parents are lazy, that it does require a lot more work and thought must go into parenting if you're going to adopt an inductive approach. And there's also the assumption that children are not capable of reasoning sufficiently in order to have conversations about why behavior is wrong and correct them in that way. And that's just absolutely false. Children will rise to the challenge that you present them. And even if they don't get it initially, just the act of conversing with them and talking about other people's feelings, talking about why some behavior is considered wrong in our family and why we don't do that kind of thing. Having those conversations, even if the child doesn't get it the first time, they'll develop the skill to understand these things across time. You're guaranteed to have more sensitive, empathetic, and more socially grounded and responsible children through this inductive approach. The other way is just disaster. Okay, so that's the end of Lecture 7b, and we'll continue on with a new topic next time. We're going to talk about personality. Bye.